In a quiet suburban neighborhood where manicured lawns and white picket fences defined the landscape, Emma Thompson lived what seemed like an ordinary life. Her home was cozy, her garden bloomed with vibrant flowers, and she took pride in maintaining her property. However, beneath the surface of this picture-perfect community lay a strict homeowners association, HOA, that controlled nearly every aspect of residents' lives. From the color of front doors to the height of hedges, nothing escaped their watchful eyes. Emma had always tried to follow the rules, but small disagreements began creeping up over time. It started innocently enough, a notice about her mailbox being slightly crooked, or a reminder to trim her rose bushes just a little shorter. At first, these requests felt manageable, even somewhat reasonable, but as months passed, the demands grew more frequent and nitpicky. One day, she received a letter accusing her of violating landscaping guidelines because she planted wildflowers instead of traditional shrubs. Another notice followed, claiming her outdoor lights were too bright and disturbed neighboring homes. Each infraction came with a fine, which Emma found unfair and excessive. Frustrated but determined not to cause trouble, Emma ignored the notices at first, hoping the HOA would back off. Instead, the fines piled up, and payment reminders turned into stern warnings. When Emma finally decided to contest the charges, explaining that her choices didn't harm anyone and actually improved curb appeal, the HOA dismissed her arguments without consideration. Their response was cold and impersonal: comply or face consequences. The tension reached its breaking point when Emma refused to pay the accumulated fines, arguing they were unjustified. In retaliation, the HOA made a drastic move. They cut off her main water supply. Without warning, the taps in her kitchen went dry. Showers stopped working, and even flushing toilets became impossible. For Emma, this wasn't just inconvenient. It felt like a personal attack designed to force her into submission. Word spread quickly among neighbors about what had happened. Some whispered sympathetically, acknowledging how unreasonable the HOA could be. Others stayed silent, fearing backlash if they spoke out. The lack of support from her community left Emma feeling isolated, but it also fueled her determination. She realized that giving in wouldn't solve anything. It would only validate the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. Instead, she vowed to find a way to fight back, not just for herself, but for anyone else who might one day find themselves in a similar situation. As days turned into weeks, living without water became increasingly challenging. Simple tasks like washing dishes or brushing teeth required creative workarounds. Emma collected rainwater in buckets and borrowed jugs from friends outside the neighborhood. While the hardship weighed on her, it also sparked something within, a fierce resolve to reclaim control over her life. Little did the HOA know, their extreme actions had set the stage for Emma's next bold move, a solution so unexpected that it would change the dynamics of the entire neighborhood forever. Living without water quickly became a nightmare for Emma. Simple chores that most people took for granted turned into exhausting challenges. Washing dishes meant filling buckets with borrowed water and scrubbing by hand. Showers were replaced with sponge baths using cold water she collected in jugs from kind neighbors or friends who lived outside the HOA's jurisdiction. Even flushing the toilet required careful planning. Emma had to pour buckets of water into the tank each time. The constant struggle wore her down, but it also made her more determined to find a solution. At first, Emma tried reaching out to the HOA again, hoping they might reconsider their decision if she explained how difficult life had become. She wrote polite letters and attended meetings, pleading her case calmly and respectfully. But no matter how reasonable she sounded, the HOA remained unmoved. Their responses were always the same: pay the fines, comply with their rules, and maybe, just maybe, they'd restore her water supply. It felt like talking to a brick wall. Each rejection left Emma angrier and more frustrated than before. Desperate for answers, Emma began researching alternatives online late at night after long days of managing her makeshift water system. At first, she looked into legal options, reading articles about property rights and utility access laws. While some information was helpful, much of it felt overwhelming and impractical. Lawsuits could take months, or even years, to resolve, and Emma needed a solution now. Then, during one of her late-night searches, she stumbled upon something intriguing: solar-powered water pumps. The idea fascinated her. Solar pumps worked by drawing water from natural sources like wells or rivers and powering the system entirely through sunlight. Since Emma's property already had an old well that hadn't been used in years, this seemed like a perfect fit. Not only would it provide her with clean water, but it would also completely bypass the HOA's control over her main supply line. Best of all, once installed, the system would be self-sufficient, requiring minimal maintenance and operating costs. Excited by the possibility, Emma dove deeper into learning about solar pump systems. She watched videos, joined online forums, and reached out to experts for advice. One local contractor specializing in renewable energy caught her attention. His website showcased projects where he'd helped homeowners achieve independence from traditional utilities. Intrigued, Emma scheduled a meeting with him to discuss her situation. During their conversation, the contractor assured her that installing such a system was feasible, though not without its challenges. He warned her about potential pushback from the HOA and suggested keeping the project low-key until everything was up and running. But there was another hurdle: cost. High-quality solar panels and pumping equipment didn't come cheap, and Emma's savings weren't enough to cover the full expense. Refusing to give up, she decided to think outside the box. Inspired by crowdfunding campaigns she'd seen online, Emma created a page detailing her story. She framed it as a fight for justice, a stand against an oppressive HOA trying to bully her into submission. Within days, donations began pouring in from strangers across the country who admired her courage and wanted to support her cause. Messages of encouragement flooded her inbox, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this battle. With funds secured and plans in motion, Emma felt a renewed sense of hope. For the first time since the water was cut off, she saw a clear path forward. Installing a solar pump wouldn't just solve her immediate problem. It would send a powerful message to the HOA that she couldn't be pushed around. Little did she know, however, that this bold move would spark a whole new chapter in her ongoing war with the association, one filled with both triumphs and unexpected consequences. Emma's decision to install a solar-powered water pump wasn't made lightly. She knew it was a bold move, one that would likely provoke the HOA even further, but she also understood it might be her only chance to regain control over her life. The idea of creating a self-sufficient water system appealed to her not just because it solved her immediate problem, but because it symbolized independence. No longer would she rely on the HOA or their approval for something as basic as water. This realization filled her with both excitement and determination. To make her plan work, Emma needed to approach the project carefully. She couldn't afford any mistakes, not when so much was at stake. Her first step was consulting with the contractor who had agreed to help her. Together, they mapped out every detail of the installation process. They decided to use her property's old well as the primary water source since it was already there and hadn't been used in decades. The solar panels would be mounted on the roof, positioned strategically to blend in with the existing architecture. Underground pipes would carry the water directly into her home, ensuring the system remained discreet and difficult for nosy neighbors or HOA inspectors to spot. Secrecy became a top priority. Emma knew that if the HOA found out about her plans before the system was fully operational, they'd do everything in their power to stop her. So, she and the contractor agreed to complete the installation under the cover of darkness. Late-night work sessions began, with Emma keeping watch while the team quietly set up the equipment. She felt like a character in a spy movie, sneaking around her own property to avoid detection. It was nerve-wracking, but also strangely thrilling. Each small victory, the successful placement of a panel, the connection of a pipe, brought her closer to freedom. As the days passed, Emma marveled at how quickly the project came together. The contractor and his crew worked efficiently, ensuring everything was installed correctly and safely. By the time the final pieces were in place, Emma could hardly believe what she had accomplished. Standing in her backyard one morning, she looked up at the sleek solar panels glinting in the sunlight and smiled. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. Her hard work had paid off. But Emma's triumph was bittersweet. While she now had a reliable water supply, she knew the battle wasn't over. The HOA would undoubtedly discover her new setup sooner or later, and when they did, they wouldn't take it lightly. Still, she refused to let fear dictate her actions. Installing the solar pump wasn't just about solving her water crisis. It was about standing up for herself and proving that she couldn't be pushed around. Every drop of water flowing through her taps was a reminder of her resilience. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Emma either. The HOA prided itself on enforcing strict rules to maintain order and uniformity in the neighborhood. Yet here she was, using cutting-edge technology to create a sustainable solution that benefited no one but herself. If anything, her solar pump system aligned perfectly with modern ideals of eco-friendliness and innovation, values the HOA claimed to support in their newsletters. But Emma didn't hold her breath expecting them to see it that way. Instead, she prepared herself for whatever came next, knowing that her fight was far from finished. Little did Emma realize, however, that her ingenious solution would soon thrust her into the spotlight, not just within her neighborhood, but beyond it. What started as a personal struggle against the HOA was about to become a story that captured the attention of people far outside her quiet suburban community. And once the world learned what she had done, there would be no turning back. The night of the final installation was tense but exhilarating for Emma. She and the contractor's team worked like a well-oiled machine, moving quietly under the cover of darkness. The hum of drills and the soft clinking of tools were the only sounds breaking the stillness of the night. Emma kept glancing toward the street, half expecting an HOA patrol car to pull up at any moment. But luck was on her side. The neighborhood remained silent, and by sunrise, the solar pump system was fully operational. When morning came, Emma turned on her kitchen faucet with bated breath. For weeks, she had dreamed of this moment, and now it was finally here. Clear, clean water flowed steadily from the tap, filling her sink with a gentle rush. It was a small thing, really, a simple act most people took for granted, but to Emma, it felt monumental. Tears welled up in her eyes as she cupped her hands under the stream, feeling the cool water splash against her skin. She had done it. Against all odds, she had taken back control of her life. Over the next few days, Emma marveled at how seamlessly the new system integrated into her daily routine. The solar panels absorbed sunlight during the day, powering the pump that drew water from her old well. Underground pipes carried the water directly into her home, bypassing the HOA-controlled main line entirely. Everything worked so smoothly that it almost felt like magic. Her showers were hot again, her laundry got done without hassle, and her garden flourished under regular watering. Life began to feel normal, or as close to normal as it could be under the circumstances. But normalcy didn't last long. Word of Emma's secret project eventually reached the HOA, though not in the way she expected. One afternoon, while pruning her wildflowers, Emma noticed Mrs. Peterson, her nosy neighbor from across the street, staring suspiciously at her roof. At first, Emma brushed it off, assuming Mrs. Peterson was just being her usual snoopy self. But later that evening, Emma received a formal letter from the HOA demanding an explanation for the unauthorized modifications to her property. They had somehow discovered the solar panels and wanted answers immediately. Emma wasn't surprised, but she was prepared. She had anticipated this moment and spent hours rehearsing her response. In a calm and confident tone, she wrote back, explaining that the solar panels were part of a private, legal water filtration system designed to serve only her household. She emphasized that the setup complied with local regulations and posed no threat to the community. Furthermore, she pointed out that her actions were necessary due to the HOA's refusal to restore her water supply, a fact she made sure to highlight in bold letters. Despite her careful wording, the HOA wasn't satisfied. If anything, they seemed angrier than ever. Board members convened an emergency meeting to discuss what they called Emma's rebellious behavior. Rumors spread like wildfire through the neighborhood, with some residents siding with the HOA and others quietly rooting for Emma. Tensions escalated when the HOA issued another letter, this time accusing her of violating community covenants and threatening legal action if she refused to remove the solar pump system. For Emma, their reaction was both infuriating and predictable. She had known the HOA wouldn't take her defiance lying down, but she also knew she had the law and public opinion on her side. What started as a personal battle was quickly turning into something bigger. Friends and acquaintances who had followed her crowdfunding campaign began sharing updates about her standoff with the HOA online. Local news outlets picked up snippets of the story, portraying Emma as a symbol of resistance against oppressive authority. Strangers started leaving messages of support on her social media, calling her brave and resourceful. As the drama unfolded, Emma couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. On one hand, she was proud of what she had achieved. Her solar pump system wasn't just functional, it was proof that creativity and determination could overcome even the toughest obstacles. On the other hand, she knew the fight was far from over. The HOA wasn't going to back down easily, and neither was she. What had begun as a quiet act of rebellion was rapidly spiraling into a full-blown war, one that would test her resolve like never before. Little did Emma realize, however, that the real showdown was yet to come. The HOA's threats of legal action signaled the start of a new chapter, one that would bring her face-to-face with judges, lawyers, and an audience far beyond her suburban neighborhood. And as the stakes grew higher, so too did the potential impact of her story, not just for herself, but for anyone who dared challenge unfair systems. The HOA's threats of legal action sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. But for Emma, it was the moment she had been preparing for. She knew the association wouldn't back down without a fight, and now they were pulling out all the stops to make her life difficult. What started as a personal dispute had escalated into an all-out battle, with both sides digging in their heels. But Emma wasn't afraid. If anything, she felt more determined than ever to prove that her actions were justified and legal. When the lawsuit papers arrived, Emma read them carefully, line by line. The HOA accused her of violating community covenants, claiming her solar pump system disrupted the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood and set a dangerous precedent for other homeowners. They demanded that she dismantle the equipment immediately or face hefty fines and court penalties. To outsiders, it might have sounded like a reasonable argument. After all, HOAs existed to maintain order and uniformity. But Emma saw right through their claims. This wasn't about aesthetics. It was about control. The HOA wanted to show everyone who was boss, and she had become their unwilling example. Rather than panicking, Emma rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She hired a lawyer who specialized in property rights and environmental law, someone who understood the nuances of cases like hers. Together, they gathered evidence to build a strong defense. Emma provided documents showing how the HOA had cut off her water supply unfairly, emails highlighting their refusal to negotiate, and photos proving her solar panels were discreet and unobtrusive. Her lawyer also pointed out that Emma's use of renewable energy aligned with state policies encouraging sustainability, a fact the HOA conveniently ignored. As preparations for the trial began, Emma noticed a shift in the neighborhood dynamic. Some residents, intimidated by the HOA's authority, avoided her altogether, avoiding eye contact during morning walks or steering clear of conversations at the mailbox. Others, however, started to quietly rally behind her. A few neighbors slipped notes under her door, thanking her for standing up to the association and admitting they'd always found its rules excessive. One elderly woman even brought over a plate of cookies, whispering, "You're doing the right thing." These small acts of support reminded Emma that she wasn't entirely alone. Meanwhile, the HOA scrambled to justify their position. Board members held impromptu meetings, trying to rally residents against Emma by painting her as a troublemaker who disregarded community values. Flyers appeared on doorsteps urging homeowners to report any unauthorized modifications to their properties, clearly aimed at intimidating anyone thinking of following Emma's lead. Yet their tactics only fueled public curiosity. Local reporters caught wind of the growing feud and began covering the story, portraying Emma as a modern-day David taking on a corporate Goliath. Headlines like "Homeowner Fights Back Against Overbearing HOA" and "Solar Power Sparks Suburban Showdown" drew national attention, turning Emma's private struggle into a public spectacle. The media coverage worked in Emma's favor. People from across the country reached out to share stories of their own battles with HOAs, offering advice and encouragement. Many praised her ingenuity and resilience, calling her a role model for anyone fighting unjust systems. Environmental advocates highlighted her use of solar power as a step toward greener living, while consumer rights groups applauded her stand against bureaucratic overreach. Even strangers passing through the neighborhood stopped to take pictures of her house, curious to see where the drama was unfolding. Despite the mounting pressure, Emma remained focused. She attended every pre-trial hearing, dressed professionally, and speaking confidently whenever given the chance. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the increasingly flustered HOA representatives who struggled to defend their extreme measures. At one point, the judge questioned why the HOA hadn't simply restored Emma's water supply instead of escalating the conflict, leaving the board members visibly uncomfortable. It was a small victory, but Emma savored it nonetheless. Behind the scenes, however, the stress was undeniable. Late nights were spent reviewing case files, strategizing with her lawyer, and responding to messages from supporters. Friends outside the neighborhood urged her to settle, warning her that legal battles could drag on for months or even years. But Emma refused to give in. She knew this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about setting a precedent. If she backed down now, the HOA would continue bullying others, unchecked and unchallenged. The day of the trial arrived, and the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Reporters jotted notes in the back rows while neighbors filled the seats, some curious, others visibly nervous about being caught in the crossfire of such a public dispute. Emma sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped tightly, but her expression calm. Beside her, her lawyer shuffled through documents, occasionally whispering words of reassurance. Across the aisle, the HOA's representatives looked stiff and uneasy, their polished suits unable to mask their growing discomfort. As the proceedings began, the judge wasted no time cutting through the formalities. He listened intently as both sides presented their arguments. The HOA's attorney argued that Emma's solar pump system violated community covenants designed to maintain uniformity and property values. They claimed her actions set a dangerous precedent, encouraging other homeowners to flout the rules. But when it was Emma's turn to speak, she delivered her testimony with quiet confidence. She explained how the HOA had cut off her water supply over minor disputes, leaving her without basic necessities for weeks. Her voice trembled slightly as she described the hardships: washing dishes in borrowed buckets, skipping showers, and feeling isolated by her own neighborhood. But her resolve never wavered. Emma's lawyer bolstered her case with hard evidence. He presented photos of her discreetly installed solar panels, expert opinions confirming the system complied with state regulations, and letters from environmental organizations praising her sustainable approach. Most damning was a timeline showing how the HOA had escalated the conflict unnecessarily, ignoring multiple attempts by Emma to resolve the issue peacefully. This isn't about aesthetics or property values, he argued. It's about punishing someone who dared to stand up for herself. The judge appeared skeptical of the HOA's claims almost immediately. At one point, he leaned forward, addressing the HOA's attorney directly. If Miss Thompson hadn't been denied access to water, a fundamental human need, would we even be here today? The question hung heavy in the air, leaving the HOA representatives scrambling for a response. Their stammered answers only highlighted how disproportionate their actions had been. By the end of the hearing, it seemed clear where the judge stood. A week later, his ruling confirmed what many had suspected. Emma had every right to install and use her solar pump system. Not only did it comply with all applicable laws, but it also represented a reasonable solution to an unreasonable situation created by the HOA. In a decisive blow to the association, the judge ordered them to reimburse Emma's legal fees and restore any remaining services they had withheld. He also issued a stern warning to the HOA, urging them to reconsider their enforcement tactics and focus on fostering goodwill rather than fear within the community. News of the verdict spread like wildfire. Local newspapers hailed Emma's victory, calling it a win not just for her but for individual rights everywhere. Social media exploded with messages of support, and strangers sent donations to help cover residual costs. Environmental groups invited her to speak at conferences, eager to highlight her story as an example of innovation meeting necessity. For Emma, the attention was overwhelming but validating. She had fought not just for herself, but for anyone else who might face similar injustices, and now she had won. But the aftermath wasn't entirely celebratory. Some neighbors remained divided, torn between admiration for Emma's courage and loyalty to the HOA's authority. Tensions lingered, though quieter now, as people debated whether the ruling would inspire more residents to challenge the association's strict rules. Meanwhile, the HOA board went silent, retreating behind closed doors to regroup and salvage what remained of their reputation. It was clear they hadn't expected to lose so publicly or so decisively. For Emma, the battle may have ended, but its impact was far from over. As she walked out of the courthouse that day, surrounded by reporters and well-wishers, she felt a mix of relief and pride. She had proven that standing up for oneself could lead to meaningful change, not just personally but communally. Her solar pump system still hummed quietly on her roof, a symbol of resilience and resourcefulness. And though the road ahead might still hold challenges, Emma knew one thing for certain. She had faced down a Goliath and emerged victorious. Emma's victory in court marked the end of her legal battle, but it was only the beginning of a new chapter in her life and the lives of those around her. The ruling sent ripples through the community, forcing neighbors to confront uncomfortable truths about the HOA and its methods. For years, many had quietly resented the association's strict rules and overbearing enforcement, yet few had dared to challenge them. Emma's courage inspired others to speak up, sparking a wave of change that no one could have predicted. In the weeks following the trial, whispers turned into conversations, and conversations grew into action. A group of homeowners formed a committee to advocate for reform within the HOA. They called for more transparency, fairer dispute resolution processes, and a shift away from punitive measures toward collaboration. At first, the HOA resisted, clinging to their old ways, but public pressure mounted. Local news outlets continued covering the fallout from Emma's case, shining a spotlight on similar grievances across other neighborhoods. Faced with mounting criticism, the board reluctantly agreed to meet with residents to discuss changes. A small step, but one that gave hope to those who had long felt powerless. For Emma, life returned to a sense of normalcy, but with an added layer of purpose. Her story had captured national attention, earning her invitations to share her experience at sustainability conferences, homeowner advocacy events, and even local schools. She spoke passionately about the importance of standing up for oneself, embracing innovation, and finding creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems. Sometimes, she would say during these talks, you have to take a stand, not just for yourself, but for others who don't yet realize they can. Her solar pump system became a symbol of her defiance and ingenuity. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now stopped by to ask questions or simply thank her for what she had done. Some even expressed interest in installing similar systems themselves, seeing firsthand how effective and unobtrusive they could be. Inspired by this growing curiosity, Emma began hosting workshops on sustainable living, teaching others how to harness renewable energy and reduce reliance on traditional utilities. What started as a personal necessity evolved into a mission to empower others. The HOA, meanwhile, struggled to rebuild trust. Membership in the board plummeted as frustrated residents refused to participate in an organization they now viewed as outdated and oppressive. New leaders emerged, individuals willing to listen, adapt, and prioritize fairness over control. Slowly but surely, the neighborhood began to heal. Rules were relaxed, fines were reduced, and communication improved. While tensions didn't disappear overnight, the atmosphere shifted from one of fear to one of cautious optimism. As time passed, Emma reflected on everything she had been through. The hardships, the dry taps, the sleepless nights, the endless stress, had tested her in ways she never imagined. But so too had they revealed strengths she didn't know she possessed. She had learned to navigate complex systems, build alliances, and remain steadfast in the face of adversity. More importantly, she had discovered the power of community, not just in numbers, but in shared values and mutual support. Today, Emma's garden blooms brighter than ever, watered by the same solar-powered system that helped her reclaim her independence. Passers-by often pause to admire her wildflowers, unaware of the quiet rebellion they represent. To Emma, though, every petal serves as a reminder. Sometimes, the smallest acts of resistance can spark the biggest changes, and while she may not consider herself a hero, there's no denying the impact she made, not just in her own backyard, but in the hearts and minds of countless others ready to fight for a better, fairer future.